All right, everyone. So there was a problem with the recording of this lecture, so I decided to record it again. So I'm just going to go over the slides. There's also a couple of changes in the slides and the solution of the exercise, so that's going to hopefully help you. So this session is the second lecture about the distributed systems. So last time in the distributed system, we talked about an overview of the distributed systems and the event ordering, what is the happen before relationship, concurrent processes on different sites. And then we talked about distributed mutual exclusion, which was, then we covered centralized approach, fully distributed approach, and token passing approach for mutual exclusion. And then we introduced two algorithms for election. One is Bully algorithm, and the other one was ring algorithm. We didn't get to cover that in that lecture, so we covered it in the class. Now today, again, I'm just going to cover it in the recording, okay? So, and obviously, these were assignments for that past week. So today we're going to do a quick recap on the topics of the distributed systems lecture 1, and then we're going to cover distributed deadlock prevention, wait or die, or wound or wait. These are two different algorithms. And also distributed deadlock detection, which is again this centralized approach and fully distributed approach. All right. So a recap on distributed mutual exclusion. So DME, in that we're assuming the same idea that we have for distributed for mutual exclusion for different processes. So basically, we have some processes, and now each process might reside on a different site, the different processor. And again, the critical section for each process is that when they want to enter their critical section, they don't want anyone else to run in their critical section. And now what we want is to come up with an algorithm that satisfies this requirement. So, some type of synchronizing or communication between them that satisfies this requirement, right? And the different approaches for this is, one is the centralized approach. For the centralized approach, we have a coordinator. And in the coordinator, basically, everyone asks for permission to enter their critical section from them. So they are known to everyone. All the processes should have access to them and be able to communicate with them. And anyone who wants to enter the critical section, they will tell the coordinator through a request. And then now, based on the order of request, the reception of these requests, the coordinator can actually have a queue and then basically allow them one by one to enter their critical section. Once they exit their critical section, they're gonna send a release, and so the coordinator now can tell the next one in the queue to enter their critical section. And so the problem with this approach is that it has a single point of failure. If the coordinator has a failure, then everyone they don't know what to do, or basically they have to now pick another coordinator, which is covered in the election algorithm, right? In the fully distributed approach, now everyone is basically generating their own timestamps of the request and sending it to everyone. Instead of one coordinator, they're going to actually get permission from everyone. However, not everyone at the same time is going to enter the critical section, or they don't have the intention. So what's going to happen is that they have each node has the request, and the request message has the timestamp, and so this message gets sent to everyone else. Now, based on the intention and situation of each process, they can reply to that message immediately or defer it. And basically, for example, if a process wants to, if they don't want to enter the critical section, they receive that some other process wants to enter the critical section, and then they reply immediately and allow, they give them the thumbs up, so they're okay. Now, if they have the intention, so the tie breaking happens with the timestamp. So because when they wanted to indicate their intention of entering critical section, they also generated a timestamp and sent it to everyone. And that timestamp in that message doesn't change, right? So they know their own request timestamp, and now they see the other processes timestamp, and based on that, they tie the break. And because, again, the same message will also be delivered to that process, they will also make the same decision. So they will decide who has to go first. The other one replies the message, so one person who has the priority enters the critical section, and then once they release, then they can reply the other process with the base of basically the deferred message, right? And so in this case, you have to know the identity of all the other processes to be able to send it to everyone. Then the other approach is token passing approach. So token passing approach, we talked about like an example that, it's like a microphone that you pass on. Whoever has the microphone gets to speak, right? Or in this case, gets to enter the critical section. So a token is a special kind of a message. And when you send this message, basically you're indicating that I'm done. I'm releasing the token. And when you receive the token message, that means now you have the token, you have the permission to enter your critical section. If you don't want it, you pass it on. If you want it, you defer it, you enter your critical section. Once you want to release, then you pass it on. And in that case, there should be a logical circle of all the processes. So each process will get the message from one side and then pass the token to the other side. So it goes around all the processes. So this way, every now and often, a process will get the token, and then they have the chance to enter their critical section. Otherwise, they have to wait for the token to come by. All right? So now we want to talk about the election algorithm. So the election algorithm is when there are multiple nodes and they want to they want to elect one coordinator, right? For example, for the centralized approach. So in this case, there are different two algorithms. One is Bully algorithm and the ring algorithm, right? And so in this case, we're always talking about the processes, and we have to basically assign a priority to them. In this case, usually it's like a unique number. It can be like something, any number basically. And a process with the highest priority number should be the coordinator. Now, this priority can be whatever. In these examples, we're just like indicating with a single number, but based on the availability, the throughput, traffic, whatever location, you can come up with a number for the priority. Now, in these examples, again, we have to come up with an algorithm to find the process with the highest priority. All right? So, the Bully algorithm is, again, everyone can claim that they are the coordinator. If there is a process with higher priority, they will bully them and then, ask them to quiet down, and then they can claim for being a coordinator. And this just like goes on until you basically find the highest priority. So this is the example that we covered. There's, all these processes here, and then the 7 was the coordinator. 7 is like now has failed, and 4 gets to know about it, like through sending a message, a timeout or something. And now 4 needs to know who is the new coordinator. And the way to do is that the 4 claims that, okay, I'm going to be the coordinator, and send this message to, because they want to basically see if they are actually eligible or there is someone with a higher priority than them. So what they do is that they send this message to all the processes with higher priorities. So 5, 6, and 7. And obviously 7 has failed, so they don't respond. This can also be in the case where just like 4 was failed and then just restarted. So 4 just enters, they don't know who is the coordinator, so they start the election again. Send the message to 5, 6, and 7. Now 7 has failed, let's say, and now 5 and 6 listens to this message coming from 4, and they want to be coordinator. Well, 5 and 6 each of them are higher priority. So what they do is that they're gonna like send a message to 4 that hey, we are here, so yes, we confirm our existence. So the 4 won't be the coordinator anymore. Now, because 5 and 6 know that 4 started a coordinator, for some reason, we may need to confirm who is the coordinator. So in turn, they also invoke their own election algorithm. So in this case, 5 starts the election. They send the election message to 6 and 7. And again, because 7 has failed, because 6 wants to confirm that I am available, so, there is a higher priority process than you. They send the message to 5, so the 5 doesn't continue with that one. And now 6 basically is the highest priority process here, and then it like sends a message to everyone that I'm your coordinator. Just everyone knows about the new coordinator now. All right. And again, because there's no coordinator, there's no process higher than 6, there's no objection, right? So no one will start another election. Now, in the case of the bully algorithm, the best case, if the second highest priority process gets to know about the failure of the coordinator, they will send the message to the coordinator, and then they realize that they have failed, so no one is responding. So they're just going to announce being the coordinator to everyone, right? So that's going to like be the messages, right? And then in the worst case, if the node with the lowest identifier detects a failure, and after they start the election and all the other processes respond to them, then the second lowest priority starts the election, and then the next, and then the next. In this case, let's say, for example, instead of 4, 0 would have started, and then 1 would start, and then 2 would start, and then 3, and then 4, and then 5, and then 6. So this way, it's just like going to be a mess. There's going to be chaos over there. It's like n squared, in the order of n squared messages going on, right? So there would be, somewhat between these. Now, in the ring algorithm, basically we have a logical ring, and that's how they want to elect their coordinator. So we put all of them in a physical or a logical ring, and the way that the algorithm is working is that, first of all, the links are unidirectional, so we kind of like the token passing. We can go over the circle of the processes in one direction to cover all of them, right? And then each of the processes keep an active list of all the processes so that they know who exists, all right? Because if they know who exists, they can also tell who has the highest priority, and then they can pick them as the coordinator, right? Now, if one process wants to start the election, like due to a failure of the coordinator, they will actually start with an empty list. They put their own name on it, and then they send the message to the election message to the next neighbor. So the message itself indicates that the election has started. Now we may come up with a new list of all the processes. So and I'm the first one in the list. So keep passing the message. So it's kind of like the attendance sheet that you pass on. You write your name down. It's just like exactly like that. So then whoever receives this message, first they check the list and see if their name is there in the message. If their name, or basically identifier in this case, is on the message, that means that this message has been passed around a full circle and now it's back. And that means that it covers everyone. Because again, it's a logical ring. So, once you go from one way and you come back from the other one, you have covered all the processes. Otherwise, if the list is not complete, if the list doesn't have their own identifier, then they only keep adding themselves and passing it on, right? Once you receive the full list, then you can tell that who has the highest priority, who should be the coordinator, and now you send the second message to everyone that, okay, this is the complete list and this is the coordinator, right? So this, again, talks about the idea. We're going to take a look at it in the example, right? So in this example, let's say 7 has died, and again, we are assuming that on the lower level, we have the capability of connecting the failed links. So if the 6 was connected to 7 and 7 was connected to 0, if 7 failed, we're assuming that we have a means to be able to tell that 6 should connect to 0. Otherwise, we won't have the complete circle, right? But assuming that, in this case, let's say 4 now wants to initiate the election, so they start the election with like a message that's just like 4, and now 5 gets the message. It's not a complete message. 5 is not in it, so they keep adding themselves and sending a message. 6 receives this, add itself and send it to 0. 0 adds itself and send it to 1. And it comes all the way, and 4 is now receiving another message. I mean, it's going to be basically the same message that has been passed by, but now it receives the message, and now it looks at itself, finds itself in the list, right? So that means that, okay, this is the same message that I put my identifier in it, and it has gone all the way around the circle and has come back. So at this time, it should be complete. So I will pick the highest one, which is 6, and I'm going to send that message to everyone. So from here on, everyone would know that 6 is the new coordinator. All right? So in this case, at the best case scenario, we have like 2 end messages, because once you have to send the election message around, and then once you figure who is the coordinator, you send another message around, and that's it, right? And if by any chance different processes start the election again, so in the meantime, maybe while this message is coming by, 0 also start a new message with only 0 and pass by, right? There won't be actually any harm, because once that message receives to 4, 4 will not be in that message. So 4 will also add itself and keep it on, right? So it's just like that. After some point, the messages will contain everyone, but one time would be this message and coming back to 4, and the other one will come back to 0 and again with the full list. And it doesn't matter. Both of them now, they can like, pick the highest coordinator, send it to everyone. There's no confliction. So it's just like a bit of extra messages, but nothing else. Alright? Now we're going to talk about the deadlock prevention in distributed systems, right? So there are 2 ways to do deadlock prevention. In order to prevent the deadlock, one way we already also covered in the first half of the semester is to order the resources. If the resources are in an order, let's say alphabetical, and you get to request resources based on their order, meaning you cannot request A if you're holding B. If you are holding A, you can request B. If you're holding A and B, you can request C. But you can't do vice versa. You're just like defining a logical direction, and based on that direction, you will prevent a deadlock, which happens if you have the opposite directions, right? So again, in this case, also you can have that. You can assign a unique number to all the resources, and a process may request a resource with unique number I only if it is not holding a resource greater than I. Okay, and it's like simple to implement, but again, it's like the problem with this is that it's an overkill, and you cannot necessarily define a functionality of a process based on the different resources. Maybe they need to receive this resource first and then the other one, and it makes it difficult for the developer or the programs, and also a lot of the times it's not actually needed. So a lot of the times chances are that it's not you can get this resource and this resource, and there's no one else in the opposite direction. So it will be an overkill. Now, the other way to prevent deadlock is timestamp ordering. So with each process, you assign a timestamp when they're created, and this timestamp will be with them throughout the whole algorithm here, right? And there are 2 approaches, different. One is wait or die scheme, which is non-preemptive, and the other one is wound or wait scheme, which is preemptive. And preemption here means that a process that is requesting a resource from another process can basically preempt the resource from that process and have them restart, right, or roll back. Non-preemptive is when if a process wants to wait for another resource and that resource is being held by that process, they don't preempt them, but instead they actually wait for them. That's why they wait. They wait for that process or die. That's why. The other one is like they wound the other process and preempt it or wait. Okay? So they're 2 different, and then we're going to talk about them. So the non-preemptive approach, the wait or die, is if Pi requests a resource currently held by Pj, Pi is allowed to wait only if it has a smaller timestamp than Pj. And a smaller timestamp means that it has started earlier, and that means it's older. We've written that Pi is older. So, if Pi is younger, it will roll back and die. Alright? So the older the process will wait, the younger process will die, right? So in this case, the example is that one process J is holding this resource. Actually, in the order of the words, I'm going to stand in this. So if this process J is holding this resource, if a process I is older, meaning their timestamp is smaller, they want to request this timestamp, this resource. Because they're older than PJ, they're going to wait for them. They're going to wait for them. Once PJ is done, then PI can actually obtain the resource. So this side is older, the other side is the younger. So if PI is younger than PJ, so PJ is holding the resource again, and PI is the younger process, and they want to obtain this. In this case, because it's like held by PJ, the younger process will roll back, die, restart, and release the resources, right? So whatever resource that the process has, it will resource those so other processes can obtain them, and then it will just like restart over, and then by the time they reach this point again, maybe the resources are available, right? So again, this is the same example. We have like 3 processes with the timestamp 5, 10, and 15. So the 5, P1 will be older over there. P2 is the middle one, which is over here. P3 is the younger, which is over here. Now, if P1 requests a resource held by P2, again, PI is the older one, so they'll wait. If the younger process waits for the P2, P3 will roll back, alright? And basically, this will lead into the older the process gets, because they don't actually finish, right? Every time they roll back, their timestamp doesn't restart. It will be kept with them. But every time they roll back, now compared to the other processes, they will be relatively older. Like they get older over time, and over time, instead of like rolling back, they get to wait, and then they get to wait, and at some point they will get old enough so that, you know, they don't get rolled back. So they just wait for a resource, and then the next, and then the next if they need them, right? So, next approach is wound or wait. Again, the order will be the same. So the older process will wound, the younger process will wait. And it's exactly the opposite. So it's a counterpart, and it's like preemptive approach, right? So we say that if PI is allowed to wait only if it has a larger timestamp and is younger, it's exactly the opposite. The younger process will wait. Otherwise, PJ is rolled back, and basically PI wounds the PJ. Okay? So, again, the same example. We have P1, P2, P3 with the same timestamp. P1 is the older one, P2 is holding the resource, and P3 is the younger one. So if P1 requests the resource by P2, the resource will be preempted from P2, and P2 will be rolled back. Right? In this case, the requester doesn't wait or roll back. The requester, if they're older, they have privilege. They actually wound the process who is holding the resource. They're going to roll back, and the older process will obtain the resource. Okay? So this is the wound. In the wait case, actually the process is younger. Now the younger process, when they want to obtain this, instead of like rolling back or whatever in the other scheme, they wait. So the younger process will wait for the resource. And once it is available, they will obtain it. Now, in this scheme, the rollback process eventually gets the smallest timestamp, right? So if P2 is holding a resource, and now P1 is older, comes and requests this one, and so P2 gets wounded and rolled back. Now P1 obtains the resource. But now, once P1 is finished, P2 is the oldest in the system. So no one can wound them. And, you know, like P3 can wait, and if P3 obtained them, first in this case, now P2 is rolled back and comes and then wounds P3. Again, P2 is now the oldest, so no one will wound P2. Once they are done with this, now P3 might be the oldest one, and then no one will wound them. So this is the idea behind that. Now, if you want to compare these two, they both avoid starvation, because you will be either waiting or roll back based on the timestamp, and you know, the timestamp doesn't change. So as the processes gets done, that's the assumption, right? None of the processes is holding one resource and just like frozen. We don't assume that. The older you get, basically the processes, they will obtain their resources at some point. Now, in the wait and die, the older process must wait for the younger one to release its resources. In the wound or wait, an older process never waits for the younger process. It actually wounds and preempts it. So, but preemption also has its own downsides, right? Besides that, though, there are fewer rollbacks in wound than wait. And the reason is, in the wait and die, when a process is young, and then they want to obtain this resource, because they're young, they cannot obtain it, and they roll back. Now, the problem is, once they roll back and they restart again, now they want to obtain it again. Now they're still young, so now they roll back again. Now they want to obtain it again, and they're young, and they roll back again, right? But in the case of the wound and wait, that doesn't happen. So if PJ wants to request the PI gets wounded, requests the same resource, and this time PI waits, right? You remember? As the example. Sometimes I and J gets confusing. So, but I try to keep this side the older, this is the middle, and this is the younger. So if P2 is holding the process, and now P1, the older one, comes here, right? They preempt P2, and P2 restarts. Now that the P1 holds this resource, if P2 restarts again and come back and wants to obtain the resource, now they're the younger one. But in the wound and wait scheme, the younger one waits. So they just wait for the other process. So the number of rollbacks that you're like, have to invoke to different processes will be less. But again, preemption and, making the process rollback is also not very easy, making a process, in the middle of its execution. And again, this is not the process itself. So in the wait or die, the process itself dies in that case. So they know how to release their resources, or save the state, whatever. But in the case of the wound and wait, because you are at another process or your operating system is trying to wound the process, it's not very easy, right? Now, we go to the distributed deadlock detection, alright? So, we have local wait for graphs of different sites. So we have a system, we have a number of processes, and processes might obtain resources on different sites. So in this case, and based on the information, each site will keep a local wait for graph. So if you don't remember, the wait for graph was for different processes waiting for the other processes in cases that resources are a single instance, right? So a general allocation graph was for when the processes in the circle were waiting for resources shown in rectangles. And if a rectangle is assigned to a process, that means they are holding this resource, there would be an arrow from the rectangle to the circle. Now, in the cases that the resources are only single instance, then we can actually translate those and remove the squares and say, okay, if process 1 is waiting for this resource, and this resource is assigned to PA2, technically process 1 is waiting for PA2 because they are waiting for the PA2 to release this resource. There's no other way that they can obtain this resource, right? So, in this case, we show it by a direct arrow from process 1 to process 2, and then there's no resources there. So based on the information that each site has, they have a wait for graph locally. So, for example, in this case, site 1 has the information that P2 is waiting for P1, P2 is also waiting for P3, P5 is waiting for P1. And that means P3 is holding a resource that P2 is waiting for, and that's why P2 is waiting for P3 to finish and release this resource. Same goes with this one. And the edges are basically indicating this. Now, site 2, on the other hand, has some different information. They know that P3 is waiting for P4, and P4 is waiting for P2. Again, the information might be shared, might be common, might be different. This is a simple example that it's not common. Now, how to detect a deadlock in this situation? So one way is to basically come up with a global wait for graph. So either one of the nodes will be like the coordinator, and then everyone send their information to that, so they can come up with the big picture or the global wait for graph, right? So this information from P1, 2, 3, and 5, and then this information from P2, 3, and 4. If you combine them together, you get the global picture, and now you can tell, okay, P4 is waiting for P2, P2 is waiting for P3, P3 is waiting for P4, so if you have a deadlock over here with these processes. Okay? So, this is the centralized approach, so you have to have the global picture, everyone should send their information to that. Now, this is the centralized approach. Now we also have the fully distributed approach, right? In the centralized approach, each of them will hold their own graphs. At some intervals, they will update the coordinator, and the coordinator now have a single global union of all these wait for graphs, and then can detect the detection algorithm, and then let the other sites know. Now, at different points of time, the coordinator can update the information. So, for example, whenever a new edge is inserted, so site basically updates their local wait for graph, they can also update the coordinator. Another option is that periodically, and they can update their wait for graph or send their heartbeat to the coordinator. This is my status at this point. Again, after some time, this is my status at this point. Or, on the other case, if the coordinator itself wants to, every now and then wants to start a detection algorithm, they can invoke it, and they can actually ask for, everyone that, send your most recent status or information, and then they gather information and run the algorithm, right? So, one issue with that, though, is that the order of the reception of the messages, right? So in this case, let's say we have site 1 and we have the site 2, and now we have the coordinator. The coordinator can be a different site, or it can be just one of these sites, it doesn't matter. Now, at this point of time, this information has P1 is waiting for P2, this information has P3 is waiting for P1, and the coordinator has this information. Now, normally, if P2 releases a resource, that means that this edge will be removed, because that resource is available, so P1 is not waiting for P2 anymore. Now, after releasing this, if they want to send a request for a resource which is held by 3, that will now add a new edge from P2 to P3. But because they have already released their resource, we won't have the cycle. So right now the coordinator can tell that P3 is waiting for P1, P1 is waiting for P2. Now if we remove this edge and add an edge here in between these two, there's no cycle. P2 is waiting for P3, P3 is waiting for P1, and that's it. But these are two distinct messages, right? Now, when we are sending this to the coordinator, the problem is we are telling them to remove the edge from P1 to P2 and add the edge from P2 to P3. If the order of these messages actually will flip, and the coordinator gets this message first, they will think that, oh, P2 is holding the resource, P1 is waiting for them, and P3 is waiting for P1, and now P2 wants to wait for P3, and that is a deadlock, right? So they come up with a false deadlock alert. Okay? So, now let's go to the fully distributed approach. So in the fully distributed approach, the sites that they don't necessarily know about all the information about the other parts, there's also no coordinator. But instead, each of them share the responsibility of detecting a deadlock, and each of them, besides their own local wait for graph, they also augment their graph with a virtual node. Like, it's not actually present, it doesn't have it's not a process, but it's a virtual node of PX, right? And they get this partial information that if they know that PI is waiting for some other process, outside of this site, some other resource outside of this site. So that means PI is waiting for a different process. But they don't necessarily know all the details of that information. So instead, they draw the edge between PI and PX. So that means that PI is waiting for a resource external to this site, right? And vice versa. If a process from a different another site sends a request to this to a request in this site, we can also show that by a different process is waiting for a process here, and again we show that from an edge from PX to PI, right? And now each of the sites, they can invoke their own detection algorithm. If there is a cycle which does not have anything to do with PX, that is all, they already have the information about the processes. So P1, 2, and 5, they have a circle, and that's enough. If there is no cycle with the PX, they don't have to do anything in terms of like distributed detection. If there is a cycle that includes PX, that doesn't necessarily mean a deadlock. It could mean a deadlock, right? They can see, there is a request coming from outside of the site, and then there is a request going from this site to outside. If they actually end up to getting a full loop, then there will be a deadlock. But if they're not related or they don't make a loop, then the problem is not there, right? So at this point, they're going to start the detection algorithm in a distributed way to see if that actually has happened, right? So they need to share some of their information with the other sites to help detect to see if the deadlock is there, right? So in this example, I'm going to show some part of it on the blackboard. So this is the augmented local wait for graph. So this site has this PX, and we know that P3 is waiting for a resource somewhere else. And also we know that some other process is waiting for P2, and that's all we need to know at this point, right? And on site 2, we know that, P2, P3, P4, they have this relationship. And also P2 is waiting for a resource outside of this site. And again, another different process is waiting for P3. We know this information partially. Now, because each of them actually now can find, there's a cycle here, with the PX involved, right? So in this case, one of them can start sending the information about that specific cycle and send it to the other one, and then the other ones will learn from this, right? So if, let's say, site 1 invokes it, it will transmit this message that, P2 is waiting for P3, and I know P3 is waiting for something, and I know something is waiting for P2, right? So this is the cycle that I see. And then we will send it to P2, to the site 2. Now, site 2, take a look at this information. So P3 is waiting for something, and it already knows that, P3 is waiting for P4. I know that. And something is waiting for P2. And again, I know P4 is waiting for P2. That's fine. But what I don't know, or I didn't know up to this point, is that P2 is waiting for P3. I didn't know that P2 is waiting for P3. Now I can augment my local graph or add this edge to my local graph. So this way, site 2 will complete its own, not complete, but actually augment or add this edge to its local wait graph. And then wait for graph will become like this. Now S2 can actually detect a deadlock which does not have PX involved. So it can be sure that there is a deadlock. Alright? So the outcome also would be the same if S2 detected the deadlock first. As an example, we don't have it on the diagram, but as an example, if P2 and P3 and P4, this information, which is about this cycle, is sent to the site 1. So in this case, site 1 doesn't just add one edge, but actually it knows about P4. So it doesn't have P4 in its graph. So what it will do, I'm going to write it on the blackboard just to help out. Yeah. So S1 already knows this. P1, P5, P2, P3, and then it knows about the PX, right? And now site 2 has PX, and it has P2, and it has P3, and it has P4. Right? So it sees this cycle, sends this information to this one. Now, on this side, we learn about this, and then we say, okay, I have P2, I have P3. I don't have actually P4, so I'm going to add P4 to my graph. And so you're telling me P3 is waiting for P4. Okay, I didn't know that. I knew that P3 is waiting for something, but now I know that that is actually P4. So this is the case. Now I knew that something was waiting for P4. Now you're telling me that is P4 that is waiting for P2. Sorry. So I knew that something is waiting for P2, but I didn't know what. Now you're telling me P4 is waiting for P2. So good to know. So this actually is this. And that's it. By adding this and these two edges, like resolving that this edge and this edge is basically this and this, now this site 1 also can tell that, okay, now P2 is waiting for P3, P3 is waiting for P4, and P4 is waiting for P2 again. So there is the cycle, and now they can detect the deadlock. Alright? So, now, this is the other one, this is the exercise, and we didn't get to cover it. Now we can show it in the slides, with a couple of extra slides. I don't have to go over the blackboard. So, in this case, consider the above local wait for graphs at sites S1 and S2. Is the system in a deadlock state? If so, which processes are involved in the deadlock? And show how you would check the existence of a deadlock. Alright? So, this is one step even like further than the last example that we did, which is the resolving. So, in this case, site 1 knows about these processes, process 1, 5, 2, 6, 7, and they also know some information about like resources outside of this. So P1 is waiting for something outside, and something outside is waiting for P5. That's what they know. Now, in this case, site 2 has this information. So P9, 10, 4, and 8 are there, but also we know that something from outside they are waiting for P4, and P8 is also waiting for some resources outside. Okay? Now, each of these sites now can detect a cycle with the PX, right? This one and this one. Now, again, they like the other parts, which is like all these nodes and edges, they don't matter anymore. These also they don't matter. What matters is that P1 now detects the cycle with a PX, which is this, and sends this information to the site 2. Now, what does site 2 learn from this? First of all, site 2 doesn't have P1 and P5 and this edge. So the first thing that we add to this is this is the new information, and what we will learn about it is that there is a P5, there is a P1, and P5 is waiting for P1. That's the first thing to know. How about this edge? How about this edge? So P1 is waiting for something outside. Okay. What do we have here? So here we knew that something outside is waiting for P4. So now we can resolve this. We can relate this edge and tell, okay, now I know that basically this edge is the same as this. So P1 is waiting for P4. Also, what about this edge? So I know something from outside is waiting for P5. Now, on this side, I knew that P8 is waiting for something outside, and site 1 is telling me something outside of S1 is waiting for their P5. So now I can actually relate this edge to this edge. And then basically we'll be able to tell, oh, this edge means that P8 was actually waiting for P5. So after this resolving, they can tell now, okay, now without the P considering the PX anymore, now I have a full cycle. P5, P1, P4, P9, P8, and P5, right? In this case, they can resolve this and detect this deadlock. And again, these examples are simple, and we can resolve this one-to-one. If there's only one external, there are two sites, and one node is only has a request outside. They also have one request coming from outside. We can match these together. In these examples with simple graphs, that's as far as we can get. In if they have like multiple nodes, if there are multiple arrows to the PX or multiple arrows coming from the PX, obviously there will be more information needed. We can't just show it with simple graphs. There will be, metadata to be able to tell, right? They can probably send their actual information within the OS, to indicate what are the processes that these are waiting on. All right? So that's about it. And, I hope everyone is doing well with their Project 3 implementation. And there will be not much time left. All right? And we'll get prepared for the exam as well. And if you have any questions, I guess bring it on Piazza or office hours. All right? See you on next session. Good luck.